All right, so this is a review for the first exam or the first few chapters of Anatomy and Physiology 1 at Washington State Community College. And my name is Sierra Space. I've been tutoring here for roughly 2 years. I'll hit 2 years this year. So I'll do my best to help you out. All right, so here's just a little bit of the overview of the class. I know that you had mentioned that you were not really familiar with Washington State, some of the teachers' policies and stuff, so I thought I would just throw in a little bit of information about how this class runs, how it usually works. Of course, I am not the instructor, so I don't know everything, but I did have this class in the past, and I have helped some people with this course, so I will share with you what I know. So in the summer semester, obviously it's condensed. It's usually 8 weeks instead of 16. So you're doing double the work, but you're getting the credit done faster, which is nice. So since it is condensed, you're going to usually cover 1 to 3 chapters per week instead of just 1 chapter per week. Now the grading scale is something I would like to note for this class. It's a little bit different than many of the other classes. At Washington State, most of the time a 90 is an A, the cutoff for an A. In this class, it's typically not, and I don't think that matters what teacher or instructor you have. I believe that's the policy all around for anatomy and physiology. I think 93 is a cutoff for an A, and then it's not an 80 is a B, it's a little bit higher than an 80, and so on and so forth. So it is a little bit different, so I'd encourage you to look at your syllabus if you're not 100% sure how the grading scale is in this class. And then finally, mainly this class consists of exams. Obviously, there are usually some forums or in-class assignments, depending on how you have the class formatted, whether it's a blended online or in-person class. But the exams do constitute most of the points. And exams are usually 100 points apiece. They consist of multiple choice questions, fill in the blank, true or false. Sometimes if you're taking them online, which I had some of the exams online when I had this class in the past. If it's multiple choice, the fill in the blank and the true or false are multiple choice online, just so that you don't have to type in answers. It's usually just a multiple choice question, but I'm not sure how they do that in person. I'm assuming that you'd probably just write the answer in the blank. Exams are usually anywhere from 25 to 50 questions. Most of the exams I had were 25 questions, 4 points apiece. Now, I'm not sure how that changes from semester to semester, but that's just what I've had from my personal experiences. So that's just a little bit about this class that I'll share. And again, your instructors are usually really nice, really helpful. So if you're confused about a grading policy or how exams are set up, I'd really encourage you to talk to them. Okay, so let's get into chapter 1 and chapter 2. Again, this is a review for the first exam. So we're going to kind of go over the material that I believe is emphasized or really important to know for the first exam. Of course, there's a lot of information. If you look in your textbook, there's a lot to know and a lot to know, especially with anatomy and physiology. You can get really detailed and really in-depth. So I'm going to just kind of try and share the basic or the most emphasized points that I think you need to know, because again, there is so much that you could go over. So one of the first important questions to consider in this chapter is, what's the difference between anatomy and physiology? So the first 2 chapters in this exam, really, it was hard for me to kind of format how to talk about all this, because these chapters are kind of random. It's kind of just an overview and an introduction to things. Now, when you get past this exam and you get into specific chapters, I think it's a lot easier because you're focused on one body system or one specific topic. But these first 2 chapters are really an overview, so it's kind of a broad review here just because of the information that's in these 2 chapters. But when we're talking about anatomy and physiology, obviously this is one of the questions that is really important to understand if you want to move forward in this course. So when you think of anatomy, usually you think of, at least I think of, locations on your body, where things are located, arms, legs, top of your body, lower body, and we'll learn all the directional terms for those parts. But what do you think of when you come to physiology? And I think that's a lot of where people don't necessarily understand what physiology means. But in this sense, and if you look in your textbook or in the PowerPoints your teacher provides, anatomy is referred to as the physical body structures. So again, your fingers, your toes, your arms, your legs, your bones, those sort of things. Physiology is referred to how those body structures are functioning. Physiology is concerned about chemistry, it's concerned about the physics and the dynamics and how the body structures work, whereas anatomy is more just the location and the physical parts of the body. Now, it's important that we study anatomy and physiology together because think of, any healthcare setting, you not only need to know where different parts of the body are, where things are located, but you also need to understand how they work. Anatomy and physiology are complementary. So that's a key word, complementary. They're both very similar, they complement each other, and you have to understand both of them to understand how the human body works. Now, what makes up an organism? So this is another part of your textbook when you go through chapter 1. So we have 6 different levels here of how an organism comes about and how structural organization occurs within the human body. So of course we start out with atoms. Atoms are the most basic unit that you can't break apart anymore. You have protons, which are positive, electrons are negative, and neutrons are neutral, and those parts make up an atom. And then you have different atoms. Think of the periodic table if you've had chemistry or any kind of science class that's talked about the periodic table. You have all those elements, and you have different atoms of those elements that come together to form a molecule. So the difference, sometimes I see people get confused between atom and molecule. Atom is one single chemical, or not one single chemical, one single atoms are so basic, they're like one single unit. It's hard to describe, but molecules are a bunch of atoms together. Like atoms are the basic that you can't break apart anymore, whereas molecules are a bunch of atoms put together. And I guess that's the best way that I can describe it. So you go from an atom, and when you get a bunch of atoms together, you get a molecule. So you can see here, like we went about from just all these individual pieces to this whole big chunk of them put together. So that's the difference between an atom and a molecule. So a DNA molecule, for example, is, humans have DNA, you have to have DNA, and that's a molecule. It's made up of a bunch of atoms. So once you go from those levels, which is the chemical level, level 1, you go to the cellular level. Now the cellular level is just referring to a bunch of cells. We have all kinds of cells in our body, obviously. We have an example of a smooth muscle cell. You have different cells in different organs. You have brain cells. You have liver cells. You have cells of all types with all specific names. And so we go from an atom to a molecule to a cell. So these build upon each other. When we get a bunch of atoms together, we get a molecule. When we get a bunch of molecules together, we get a cell. So then the next one is a tissue. So when we get a bunch of cells together, we form a tissue. In this case, in the picture here, we have a bunch of smooth muscle cells gathering together to make a muscle tissue. So everything builds upon one another. We can't just go from atoms to a working organism. We have to have all these other individual steps. So then we go from a tissue to an organ. So when we get tissues together, we get organs. So to classify, and this is something I would note for your exams, to have an organ, you have to have 2 or more tissues together. So you can't have just one tissue to form an organ, you have to have 2 or more. So for example, here we have epithelial tissue and we have smooth muscle tissue. So we know we have at least 2 tissues so it can form an organ. You can't just have one tissue because then it would just be a tissue, it would not be an organ. So again, we've now built from atoms to molecules, to cells, to tissues, to organ systems. Now organ systems are just consisting of multiple organs. So it's again building on each other. We go from multiple tissues form an organ to multiple organs form an organ system. And then again, when we have a bunch of organs, we can get an organism, humans. So just think of how everything builds on each other. Think about it logistically. You can't just go from atoms to a functioning human being. You have to think about the steps to get there, and that's what this diagram is really showing. Okay. Organ systems. Now, I didn't include too many slides on this specifically. I'll give you a quick rundown of the different systems. This stuff, for the most part, is pretty much just memorization and understanding the body. Now, this chapter is really, really basic. As you work through this course, you're going to study each of these systems individually. You'll just spend a chapter working on the digestive system or just a chapter working on the muscle or muscular system. So right now, we're just wanting a basic and brief understanding of all of the systems that are within your body. And when I say systems within your body, if you don't understand what I'm meaning or what I'm saying by that, an organ system is basically just a group of organs that work together to perform one basic function to meet the physiological, so the functioning needs of the human body. So, example, muscle system, all of your muscles are working together for movement and to enable the skeletal system. So they're working together, they're physiological, they're functioning to make you and help you move. So they're all working towards one of the same end goal, and that's how we really group these systems. So here on this example or this picture, it shows that we have 12 organ systems. So one of the things that I think is important to note, and I don't know exactly how teachers will ask this, or professors will ask this on a quiz or a test specifically, so I would pay attention to how they word the question. Sometimes you will hear people say there is 11 body systems, whereas sometimes you will hear people say there is 12 body systems. The reason being this: male reproductive system and female reproductive system are obviously not the same. Some people will count them as two individual systems. Some people will count them as one individual system. So if they count it as one and they're just saying reproductive system in general, there'll be 11 systems. But if they're asking specifically for the difference between male and female, there would be 2 organ systems. That's how they get the 12. So I'd look, if you had that question on a test, how many organ systems are there? Usually it's multiple choice, and I would almost guarantee that your professors are not going to put 11 and 12 both as a choice unless they give you specific information regarding that. But if they don't, I would just go with the multiple choice answer that is 11 or 12. I'm pretty certain that they're not going to put both of those as an option. Okay, so a quick rundown of each of these and the organs that consist of them. A lot of these we learn just throughout our lives, just from being humans. We know a lot about these, and that's really all you need to know this week. You don't need to know any really specific information, just a basic what each human organ system does. Like I said, you'll dive into that deeper later in the course. So digestive system, obviously that consists of your stomach, liver, gallbladder, intestines, helps process your food. Muscular system enables movement. We talked about that one already. It consists of your tendons and your skeletal muscles. Your integumentary system, can't say that word sometimes, consists of your hair, your skin, and your nails. So it encloses your internal body structures, has a lot of sensory receptors. We can, feel when someone's touching our skin or when something's hot, when something's cold, those sort of sensors for our body. Again, that's hair, skin, and nails. Your lymphatic system. Now these two right here, we have lymphatic and endocrine. Sometimes I think people get those two confused more than some other of the systems. One thing to note, the difference between them is the lymphatic system is defending against pathogens. It's defending against diseases, it's returning fluids into your bloodstream. Your lymphatic system is consisting of your lymphatic vessels, your spleen, your lymph nodes, your thymus. Your endocrine system, however, is different. It's focused more on the glands, on your hormones. Think of your pituitary gland, your thyroid gland, your pancreas, and your adrenal glands. Your testes and ovaries, depending on if you're male or female, because those, even though they are part of the reproductive system, they also secrete hormones. And so endocrine is really secreting hormones, lymphatic is really defending against pathogens, against diseases, and trying to keep you healthy in that regard when something tries to invade your body. Okay. Nervous system, again, detects and processes sensory information, activates responses, and tells your body how to respond to certain stimuli. Stimuli is change, something that's triggering a reaction in your body. So your nervous system has your brain, spinal cord, peripheral nerves, cranial nerves. Again, you'll get into that in a lot more detail on the specific chapter that studies the nervous system. Skeletal system, bones. Think of bones. That's something I think we learn all as children. Skeleton, bones. Skeletal system supports your body, enables movement along with the muscular system. Now we go back to the male and female reproductive system. Again, we're just talking about how that helps in reproduction. We have the testes, the ovaries, the mammary glands, the breasts, that area, uterus. Those are all parts of the reproductive system. Now, like I mentioned, these two sort of have a connection, your endocrine system and your reproductive system. And that is because so ovaries and testes are part of your reproductive system because they aid in reproduction, producing offspring, but they also are hormone secreting. So they're also kind of related, well, they're not kind of, they are related to the endocrine system. So they do secrete hormones. So if you were asked on a quiz or a test, what organ is in both the reproductive system and the endocrine system, the answer would be testes and ovaries. So you'd have to answer that according to how the multiple choice is worded. Respiratory system, I think that's something we're also very familiar with. As children, getting air, breathing, delivering oxygen to the blood, removing carbon dioxide from the body. That's all parts of the respiratory system. You have to think about the trachea, the lungs, your nose, your nasal passage. Those are all part of your respiratory system. Urinary system, don't get that confused with reproductive system. Urinary system is more concerned with the bladder and the kidneys rather than your genitals. Removes waste from the blood and it excretes them. And then finally, your circulatory system. So your circulatory system is more of how your blood and your veins and your arteries flow throughout your body. So those are the 12 organ systems. Now, I will say this image, I was just thinking about this, has circulatory system. I believe that in your book, circulatory system and your cardiovascular system are grouped together. I didn't think about that when I made this PowerPoint, but it really groups your heart into your circulatory system. So your heart would be considered part of that too. All right. So here's a few miscellaneous terms to note. Again, I said this first chapter is a little bit different than the next few chapters you're going to study in this course, just because it's a really brief overview. You're kind of learning a little bit of everything, but you're not really learning anything really in depth yet. So it's kind of miscellaneous in my opinion. I kind of tried to pull out the things I thought were important or emphasized in either the PowerPoints, the book, or what I thought would be good exam questions. So these are some of the most important terms. Again, there's a lot of terms in Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, but these are the ones I found to be most important for your exam. So first off, we got pollex. Pollex is just the scientific name for your thumb. So that's a good exam question. What's the scientific name for the thumb? You would answer pollex. Same thing here, hallux, the scientific name for the big toe. Again, I thought that'd be a good exam question. Histology. What is histology? Histology is the study of tissues, and that's mentioned in the first chapter of your book, because I think back we talked about how tissues form organs, which form organ systems. Synthesis, I think this is a term you can be familiar with if you take in especially chemistry. There's like synthesis reactions, any other classes really that talk about synthesis. It's used in a lot of different biology, chemistry courses. And synthesis is usually just when you're creating chemical bonds or you're making something. So you're synthesizing something, you're building something. Parietal versus visceral. So that goes over to the picture I have here. And again, I thought this could be a good test question. So what is the layer that lines the layer of serosin that lines the walls of the ventral cavity? Say that was your question. You would want to say parietal. So ventral versus dorsal, or ventral versus anterior and posterior. You can hear ventral, dorsal, anterior, posterior, all these words that sometimes get a little bit confusing when you are first learning them. So the difference between ventral and dorsal. So if I think back, actually, an illustration that one of my teachers kind of told us in the past. Sorry, I'm not the best artist here. He had a turtle. My teacher had a stuffed turtle, and he brought it to class. And he wanted us to learn the difference between ventral and dorsal. So ventral is going to be the anterior side of the body, and your dorsal is going to be your posterior side of your body. So he would bring in this turtle, and turtles are typically, say they're walking like in this direction. So this kind that's facing the front of them, the front of their shell, the front of their body is going to be, here's their anterior. That's going to be your ventral side, and it's going to be your front. So think of the front of the turtle shell, the belly of the turtle. Now the top side of the shell, now where the shell would be in the semicircle shape, that's your dorsal side. And that would also mean your posterior side or your back side. I don't know if that helps, but I like to visualize that like a turtle shell. So the semicircle of the turtle is going to be your dorsal side, and the belly side of your turtle is your ventral side, dorsal and ventral. So when you're thinking of parietal, in terms of parietal, let's loop this back around to human anatomy, not turtles. The ventral, it's lining the walls of the ventral body cavity. So let's look here. Parietal pericardium. It's lining the ventral body cavity. So it's lining the outside of these organs here. Oop. I highlighted the wrong one after I said that. It's the outside. It's not towards the back, whereas we have the visceral layer, and it's lining the inside the back side closer to the organs. So your posterior, your inner part is your visceral pericardium. In this, because we're talking about the heart, pericardium is relating to the heart. And then your parietal is the outside here. So again, there's another example right here of the hand in the balloon. This inner one touching the hand is your visceral, because it's touching the outer surfaces of the organs. It's concerned with touching the organs, the visceral side is. Whereas the parietal side is on the outside. It's the ventral body cavity, because ventral, think, is going to be closer to the outside, the anterior, and your visceral side is going to be closer to your organs, towards your inside. Now, the description I was giving of kind of ventral and dorsal specifically didn't have to directly relate to this question. I was just kind of trying to give you like an overview of what the definition of ventral was. I'm sorry if that was like a little bit confusing. But I always hear the words ventral and dorsal, and I can never remember which one's anterior and which one's posterior, so that's kind of why I made the turtle illustration. But in this respect, or this setting, visceral pericardium is what's directly connected to your organs. And parietal is what's connected to your ventral body cavity. So again, we're going to have we'll talk about body cavities here in a minute, and we can look back to this, but ventral, when we go back to that, we have to think we have all these other organs in the body out here. And that's what it's saying. Okay, homeostasis. I know this was mentioned in the email of what you were going over and what you had a quiz over. So 2 basic ways to remember homeostasis is 1, that it maintains a relatively stable internal environment. That is what homeostasis does. It wants you to maintain stability. Bodily balance is like what I like to say. So there's a few definitions or terms you might want to be familiar with for your exam regarding homeostasis. Now, first we have stimulus. Stimulus is what's causing the change, what's resulting in your body to deviate from normal ranges. A sensor is a receptor, a monitor. It monitors the normal physiological value. We think about sensors all the time. In an airport, you go through a sensor to make sure you don't have anything that you shouldn't have. Not even in airports, all over the place. We see, metal detectors that senses metal. We have those same things in our body to detect if things are not in their normal physiological value. Again, physiological meaning their functional range, where they should be. So your cholesterol levels, for example, or your fluid, your hydration. We don't want to make sure you're dehydrated. You have to have a certain amount of water in your body. All of those things are monitored by sensors. The control is, you've probably talked about this in science classes. It's the normal of what you're comparing the current body function to. So the control has the normal ranges, and that your body will compare that control to how your body's actually measuring at the moment. An effector is what causes a change to reverse and return to its normal range. So again, that is really the few definitions you need to know regarding homeostasis. Now there's 2, we have a negative feedback loop and a positive feedback loop, and it's important to know both of these for your exam. Homeostasis, for example, negative feedback loop. All right, so let's talk about what a negative feedback loop is. So a negative feedback loop is a mechanism that reverses a deviation from a set point. So it reverses your body from going too far from a normal range. It wants to maintain the body parameters in a normal range. So when you get too hot, you don't want your body temperature to go to like 120 degrees, or it's not going to, like, your organs aren't going to function right. So a negative feedback loop would tell it to stop. So here's an example here. So right here is our normal, or this would kind of be our control, because that's what is the normal range. Now, let's look at body temperature decreases. If you're in your normal range and your body temperature decreases, homeostasis through a negative feedback loop is triggered, because if you're getting too cold, you don't want your body temperature to go to like 80 degrees. That would be terrible. Your organs would not function right. You'd have so many health problems. You could die quickly if that happened. So a heating process occurs. We have shivering. If our bodies get too cold, we start to shiver. And when we start to shiver, it causes our body to increase. That is a negative feedback loop because, again, this definition here, a mechanism reverses. So we have this change. We need to stop this change and reverse it back in the opposite direction. We want to go back to our normal range, our set point. We don't want to get too far away from normal. It's like you don't want to go too far away, because if you do, something can go wrong. It's like a little kid. Like if you have your parents, the kid doesn't want to run away too far from their parents, because if a little kid is too far away, they can get lost, they can get hurt. It's the same thing with our body. We have a normal reliance on a set point that we can't get too far away from, or we will get hurt, we will get sick, something will happen to us. And it again would work in the opposite direction. If you got too hot, you could sweat and cool back down. So that's a negative feedback loop. Now, a positive feedback loop is a little bit different. Most of the processes in your body are going to operate on a negative feedback loop, because we don't want you to get too far away from normal. We don't want to get too hot, too cold. We don't want to have too much electrolytes, not enough electrolytes, enough water, too much water. All of those things are going to be on a negative feedback loop, because when it changes, we need to stop it and we need to go back to normal. But there are a few cases where a positive feedback loop occurs. And one of the most prominent or most studied positive feedback loops in your textbook is the example of childbirth. Childbirth is a positive feedback loop, and a positive feedback loop encourages a change from the body's physiological condition rather than reversing it. So we see here in the picture, we have an example on the left, my left, of a negative feedback loop that we just talked about. Our body temperature gets over 37 degrees Celsius, which would be obviously closer to normal body range in Fahrenheit. And so we have all of this stimulus and sensors going on and effectors, and we start sweating so that we can go back to normal. When we get too hot, we sweat and we cool down. It's just like we talked about just a second ago. So a negative feedback loop is stopping that change. But if we look here on the left side, on my left side, it says positive feedback loop, childbirth. Again, an example. Why? Because, so we have nerve impulses. We have let's hear, we start with head of baby. So the head of the baby is pushing along the cervix, so the bottom of the uterus, and it's ready to be delivered. So the head of the baby is pushing against the cervix, which would be a stimulus to, that the mother is about to go into labor. The nerve impulses from the cervix are transmitted to the brain. So we have the cervix containing stretched sensitive nerve cells that are going to monitor the degree of stretching that's occurring in the cervix, like how soon the baby is going to be delivered, and those are the sensors. And after that, when we go, those messages are delivered to the brain, and the brain stimulates the pituitary gland to secrete oxytocin. Oxytocin causes stronger contractions of the smooth muscles in the uterus, which will be the effector. So we go from oxytocin carried to the bloodstream, and it's stimulating the contractions. So this effector, oxytocin, again, effector remembering, encourages the change or reverses the change depending on if it's a positive or negative feedback loop, is going to encourage the head of the baby to keep pushing. And it's going to keep going in that circle until the baby is delivered. We're not going to stop it because if childbirth went in a negative feedback loop, the baby could never be delivered. The mother would never prepare her body to deliver a baby if it was a negative feedback loop. So the main difference between the two is that the positive feedback loop allows the change and the negative feedback loop stops the change. Okay. Directional and regional terminology